Hi everyone, welcome to another monthly download from Caster by me. This month we'll be talking about RWE, or real world evidence. I picked this topic because I see more and more of our customers working on real world evidence projects and using the Caster platform to run real world evidence trials. It's an approach that I'm extremely excited about. Because as you may know, even though I see the need for randomized controlled trials and sort of the rigor of the traditional RCT and the beauty of reducing bias through randomization, I'm also very aware that those trials aren't necessarily representative of the real world, not when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Of course, it's something we're trying to fix and something that DCTs are helping with as well. But also just in the sense that the setting in which we are investigating the participants or patients in these trials aren't necessarily super realistic, right? We're very controlled, closely monitored, and obviously, patients that don't, for example, take the medication for whatever reason, are often also taken out of the analysis. There's a whole host of reasons why RCTs, are important, but not necessarily the most representative way of assessing whether a drug will work well for patients in the real world. And the FDA obviously also sees this. So we've seen more and more indications from the FDA that they'll start to value real-world evidence more and more through time. And some have expressed the expectation that real-world evidence will become more important than traditional randomized registration trials. I think that's not very close, because I think the bias that can sneak into a data set that isn't sort of the result of a randomized trial is still something that's quite difficult to cope with, and you need very high numbers and volumes to be able to correct for that post hoc. But I do think that we're going to see more and more of these trials, and I do think that with the FDA kind of embracing them, we'll see more and more sponsors, so med device, pharma, biotechs, embracing this approach, because I think typically these trials can be more accessible, cheaper, and generate better evidence to really support what a drug or device does in the real world. If I think about what's going to sort of stand in the way of this quote-unquote revolution, I think the regulatory support is one, but as I said, the FDA is basically embracing this already, so I don't expect too much of a pushback from there. I think it's mostly the sponsors feeling confident that yes, these data are actually going to help them sufficiently and are worth making an investment in. And that's also why I think typically we're looking for slightly more cost-effective solutions for real-world evidence trials, because as we're still not entirely sure how big a contribution these data are going to make to, for example, submission process, everybody's going to sort of weigh the cost against the benefits. Obviously, I would argue this is an area worth investing in, specifically if you think about tokenization. So if you really think about sort of how do I build a data set of patients that are on the drug or device that I have brought to the market or I am bringing to the market, and how do I, in the long term, sort of measure how that's impacting the population from, for example, a health economics standpoint. And so if you think about tokenization in RWE trials, it can be a very powerful tool to not only capture a lot of sort of prospective data on patients in the real world, but to also build up a data set that you can later enhance with things like claims data and things like prescription data, for example. So it's going to, I think, be a very powerful asset in the arsenal of any sponsor. I think the technology is getting better and better. Like, we're slowly starting to see more progress on the EHR integration side, and there's a lot of players already handling EHR data that can be used in a real-world evidence context. I think people are more comfortable using more traditional platforms to run prospective trials, and again, we see a ton of those in CAS. We have hundreds of registries running that where we see customers that have historically used Castor for RCTs are now running more observational studies where they're actually leveraging ePro, for example, to follow patients through time without sort of randomizing or without an additional intervention. And I think we'll start to see more and more of those, and we'll start to see consolidation of players in that space, and we'll start to see the integration of wearable data from consumer-grade wearables into those trials. And I would highly recommend everyone to stay abreast of those developments, because because of the nature of these trials, I think they can be an extremely cost-effective way of capturing a lot of extremely valuable data that can be enriched through tokenization, and that will become very powerful when it comes to future claims and for future registration of of new drugs or devices. So something we would happily engage with you on, and something I think worth your time. Okay, I'll wrap up with that. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you again soon.